Hi, everyone. I am Jen Bavard, the project manager for Just Equations. Thank you so much for joining us today for the second in our Architects of Math Opportunity webinar series, New Directions in High School Math Pathways. Before we get started, just a couple instructions for attendees. When you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. And feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar. The panelists will get to as many as they can, and we can follow up later to some unanswered questions. And we will be sending a follow-up email with a link to access the webinar recording in case you would like to listen to it. Now I'm going to hand it over to Pamela Birdman, the project director for Just Equations.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Pam Birdman. Before I introduce our guests, I'd like to share a few words about Just Equations and our Mathematics of Opportunity framework. We are based in Berkeley, and our focus is on reconceptualizing the role of mathematics in ensuring educational equity. We're just finishing our second year, thanks to our funders, Irvine Foundation and College Futures, which have supported our California work. Our core partners are Opportunity Institute, Education Trust West, Learning Works, Campaign for College Opportunity, and PACE. And our values are evidence, equity, rigor, and alignment. Our framework highlights the prevailing architecture of math opportunity, which you can see here on this slide. This prevailing architecture is undergirded by misconceptions about math ability and who can and can't do math. And those misconceptions are scaffolded by existing inequities as well as stereotypes and bias, which can further disadvantage some students in their educational pursuits. And then it is also reinforced by the way math can be used as a marker or pedigree that confers access to opportunities, a gatekeeper, if you will. And it's this architecture that Just Equations seeks to change through four interrelated dimensions, which we call the equity dimensions of math education. Math content, instruction, and assessment, which as you see are sort of braided together to inform the math readiness policies and structures that determine how math confers access to opportunity. Our focus is on math opportunity policies, including high school and college math pathways, as well as the post-secondary admissions policies that connect them. For today, our focus will be on redesigning high school math pathways, which is especially important in light of all the changes that are happening at the post-secondary level to broaden and diversify math pathways and make them relevant to students' fields and majors. Now I'm delighted to introduce our three panelists, all of whom have been working on the subject for many years. Joining us here in Just Equations Berkeley studios are Phil, Daro, and Harold Asturias. Phil is one of the principal authors of the Common Core State Standards in Math, and he has been involved with research and professional development related to math education for several decades and continues to work on implementation and policy issues related to the Common Core. Harold directs the Center for Mathematics Excellence and Equity at Lawrence Hall of Science, which is UC Berkeley's Public Science Center. His experience includes designing and providing professional development for K-12 math teachers and school districts, including those who teach English language learners. Phil and Harold will be sharing the ideas in their new report, Branching Out, which is available on the Just Equations website after the webinar. Then following Phil and Harold and joining us from Southern California is Abby Leaf. Abby's a math content specialist at Escondido Union High School District, where she led a system-wide effort to change the mathematics experiences of high school students. She also teaches in the School of Leadership Sciences at the University of San Diego. She'll talk about district-wide changes that Escondido implemented, and we'll have time for your questions at the end, and again, submit them at any point. Phil and Harold are going to talk about branching out. Just Equations invited Phil and Harold to write this report. Here's the cover. We don't have the cover on a slide. And we really wanted them to think about, with all the changes happening in post-secondary math, what are the implications for what high schools can and perhaps should be doing in response to prepare students. And we asked them to take some risks and try to outline a bold vision that folks can react to and hopefully take some action. So I will turn it over to Phil and Harold.
Thank you. This is Harold. I am going to get us started by saying that we all recognize, or many of us recognize, this problem. And we know that when we talk to parents, when we talk to teachers, when we talk to school leaders, and even when we talk to students, the status quo is not working. And I think we all have a sense of what the problem is, but we like these two aspects of the problem. First of all, too many students who are potential STEM students are being filtered out of the opportunities to pursue them. And at the same time, too many white, Asian, Latinx, and African American students are being blocked from pursuing other careers that are relevant to them because the math barriers that the current status quo puts on them. One result of that is the Matthew effect, and Phil is going to tell us about that.
The Matthew effect, before I do that, just a comment on the status quo. Too many people who aren't in the high schools, and even a lot of people in the high schools, think there's a basic pathway, a common pathway that most students take through high school courses. Nothing could be further from the truth. In a study done by SRI and Wested in California, only 3.3% of the students in California were taking the standard pathway. And the 20 most common pathways through courses were pursued by fewer than a third of the students. So it's chaos out there in terms of what course sequences the students are actually enrolling in and taking. Did I pass the Matthew effect?
Yes. One more there.
So the Matthew effect. The Matthew effect is when the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It was identified by sociologists in the 50s and 60s when they identified mechanisms in society which created greater opportunities for some based on prior opportunities and diminished opportunities for others based on prior lower opportunities. And so it had a multiplying effect. And so a good way to understand this is an analogy to a soccer team. Two little girls are going to play soccer for the first time, Diana and Gail. And Diana and Gail are close friends. They're athletically almost the same. They run almost the same speed, but Diana's just a tiny bit faster. They go to soccer practice the first day. The coach throws a ball out. They both run for it. Diana gets there a split second sooner and kicks it. They do it again and again. And after 20 times, Diana's kicked it 19 times. Gail's kicked it once. So even though these students were hardly different at all to begin with, at the end of the very first practice, Diana knows a lot more about kicking the ball. And after a week of this, Diana knows a lot about kicking the ball, because every time she kicks the ball, she gets feedback about how the ball behaves when she does it this way or that. And she's starting to think, and so is the coach, and so is Gail, that she's, quote, good at soccer. And Gail's starting to think that she's not. And this is the Matthew effect. And over a period of a month, it'll get worse and worse. Meanwhile, across the field is another soccer team, the one that eventually wins the championship. In that soccer team, the coach throws out 20 balls, one for each girl. They all get practice kicking the ball. And the small difference between Diana and Gail to begin with remains a small difference, as they both learn from kicking the ball many times. This analogy is actually a personal experience. I have 3 daughters, and 2 of them went out for soccer at the same time and had those 2 coaches I just described. And the effect was permanent in their beliefs about themselves. In math classrooms, we do many things that where we're shooting ourselves in the foot as far as the Matthew effect. When a teacher poses a problem and some kids go, ooh, 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 because they get the answer quickly, what are those other kids who aren't going, ooh, 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 doing? Maybe for a while they're thinking about the problem and they just haven't finished yet. After a while, many of them just give up, and it's between the teacher and the ooh, ooh kids. That's making the rich get richer and the poor get poor in an unnecessary way. When we look at the data on who teaches whom, and the likelihood that a poor kid will have a substitute on any given day being so much higher than a kid from a wealthier neighborhood, we can see that the opportunities are lower to begin with, and the lower opportunities lead to less learning, which leads to less opportunities. And on the other hand, good opportunities lead to more learning, which leads to better opportunities. And so we've got a system which is like that first soccer team, making it worse than it needs to be instead of making it better. So underlying everything we think about is how do we reverse these Matthew effects and create something more a virtuous cycle rather than a vicious cycle. And I think I've already talked about the status quo.
That's me. Yeah. So as Bill was talking about those systems, I think that in the slide that you see on the screen right now, go back to the, we see these 2 realities. That the systems need to become respond to a future musician, for example, who is not interested in traditional math courses, but also a student who wants to pursue STEM, like an engineer student, but hasn't had the opportunities to build the foundational knowledge that they need. Therefore, what's the next? Then we are proposing the idea of creating branch pathways, meaning that we have courses that are rigorous enough for those students who are pursuing other careers and giving them the opportunity. So at the same time, and here are the goals for designing these branch pathways. One is to have STEM students who are interested in STEM to learn the mathematics that they need, but those who are interested in branch careers also learn relevant and rigorous mathematics that they will use, that they will need. But we need to make sure that Latinx and African American students are given the opportunities to thrive in college and expand the representation in the STEM fields. Then one of the most important pieces is that we need to create opportunities for them if they start in one path to be able to go back to the other one. So if they start in branch path, they can go back to STEM. So to do that, we need to give them options that are not only accommodate, but are based on their aspirations and instead of being placed by systems that do not account for their interests and choice. Next, go to the next one. And so as we think about the new pathways, high school pathways, we need to think about them as pathways, not as tracks. And of course, they must continue to be rigorous pathways, but articulate with post-secondary education. they must give more weight to student aspirations. And we need to make sure that we are addressing the systemic bias and privilege and how those create or not opportunities for students. And we need to support students who have not had the opportunities, that have uneven opportunities to learn the content that they need. And one example of that is creating some summer or semester bridge courses. So as we continue to think about this, we must deliberately address implicit bias, assumptions about students' capabilities, and the ways that math traditionally reinforces privilege. And that's a systemic audit that we need to continue to make in order to create improvements. Next. Oh, go on.
So these two pathways, the STEM pathway and the branch pathway, just to be very clear, placement is eliminated. Students choose which pathway they want to challenge and to take. So that's one way in which it differs from tracking. It's a student option, just like students choose their majors in college. And there can be prerequisites and so on, and there should be recruitment of students into the STEM pathway. And both pathways lead to college eligibility. The post-secondary policy context is an important reason why it's timely for high schools to be undertaking an improvement in the system they've been using. College admissions historically has required, it depends on the state, but it's very common for 3 years of mathematics culminating in Algebra 2, and for the system to be designed through Algebra 2 towards calculus. And everybody heads down that same road, but some make it further than others, some repeat courses, many repeat courses, and so on. And that admissions policy is starting to show much more flexibility and look at equivalence of for Algebra 2 and value statistics more and so on. But I just want to look at this calculus as the driver. David Brassud in 2017 and earlier looked at what becomes of AP calculus students once they get to college. And this pie chart, if you haven't seen this data, is pretty shocking. One would think that most of the students who successfully completed AP calculus move on to the next course. Well, that light green piece of the pie that's those students who took calculus 2 or higher. And you can see it's about 1/6. More students repeated calculus 1 than took the next course. And of those students who repeated calculus 1, almost half of them earned a C or lower. And about as the same number of students took pre-calculus, college algebra, remedial math, and far more than took the next calculus course. And then another group, about the same numbers, took advanced calculus, went on to non-mainstream courses like business, calculus, statistics, or no math at all. So this is not a very pretty picture for the value of AP calculus in the student's actual pursuit of future mathematics at the university. So the policy context is changing. Algebra 2 is no longer, in many systems, considered a prerequisite for credit-bearing courses. There are alternative prerequisites. The California state system, for example, is now having each credit-bearing course determine its own prerequisite and providing co-requisite courses to help students whose prior learning isn't quite enough and to support them to succeed, for example, in a statistics course. So the solution that we're putting forth has these basic elements. The pathways are options, and they all lead to post-secondary opportunities with some flexibility to switch. There's relevance of the pathway content to the student's aspirations in terms of what expertise they acquire and how it aligns with their goals. Students are recruited into STEM pathways, especially from underrepresented groups, and there's support for students to succeed in the pathway they choose. So we're going to look at this with, as long as Abby's on the phone, so I won't mention it, but we're going to show you a few examples of districts and schools that have jumped ahead and are already using a pathway option like this. So we'll talk more about Escondido. Here at Oregon has a system now where ninth graders take Math 1, 10th graders take Math 2, and after Math 2, there's a branching. One branch goes off towards calculus. One branch goes to applied mathematics and mathematical modeling. Another is towards statistics and modeling. And the third is the pre-calculus pathway that leads to calculus and AP. And from these three, there are different options afterward. There's about 60 high schools in Oregon are piloting this program, and they're pretty happy about it. And there's other examples out there, but just so you can see, real people are really doing this. So the branching starts at 11th grade. There's an alternative to traditional Algebra 2. There's a fourth-year course for students who take that branch. And there's going to, we hope in the future, be an honors and maybe even an AP version of the fourth-year course that makes it equivalent to a college-level course along that branch. So in order to make this work, we have to face and deal with some realities. Because of the historic bias of the system, you can't just offer options and let it go at that. We have to actually recruit students into STEM from Latinx and African American and gendered groups that historically are underrepresented in STEM majors. And that recruitment, the key to that recruitment is going to be participation of math and science teachers. A math teacher or a science teacher telling the student eye to eye and face to face, I see something in you, does far more to advance the recruitment than just watching slides or watching a movie. So getting the teachers and the math department and the science department involved in the recruitment is key to success. And the support for the students to succeed in what for them may be a challenging choice begins in the culture of the classroom, a culture where mistakes are accepted and not feared, and good instruction. We're not going to go into that all now. So we're making this shift from thinking of pathways as tracks to thinking of pathways as leading to opportunities and helping students choose and succeed in the opportunity they want. And we have to be concerned with the coherence of those students' actual pathway through courses, not just the one that we post in the book. And so each segment will have to do its part, and we're not going to go through these on the screen, just to show you that in the report, we did some preliminary thinking about what the K-12 segment, the post-secondary institutions, and the research community can contribute to making some version of this dream come true. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Abby from Escondido, where they've been living the dream for a little while now.
Yes, we have been living the dream. Thank you, Phil, very much. I want to quote you. You said you can't just offer options and leave it at that. I think that was something we recognized pretty early on in our work. And so we've been pushing on and identifying and pushing on the system-wide structures in a school district that need attention, need change in order for something like detracking or some different pathway to survive. And it's so timely that this policy level talk has begun because even if we changed our whole system at the K through 12 level, I mean, or in our little world of our 5 high schools in Escondido, without changes to the bigger system in policy and practice, our work won't survive, because we're still feeding into this system that has some problematic practices as that you identified. Next slide would be great. So you quickly saw this slide. We were tasked by our school board with, once our teachers had decided they wanted to follow an integrated pathway with that option being provided for us with the Common Core, we decided that this is what we wanted to do. All of our teachers, we have between 55 to 70 teachers depending at time, and they actually voted on an integrated pathway. And then we were tasked with designing a pathway that allowed for an opportunity for students to get to calculus. So this is our pathway here that we see. You also should see from Math 2 through Math 4, we have opt-in honors options. So every single student in our system has the opportunity to study topics in a little more depth and receive an honors designation should they choose that. One of the questions people ask me a lot is why did we feel the need to detrack? We were in this position where our feeder districts were feeling like they wanted to detrack, and we philosophically believed we wanted to, and we did a deep dive into our data, which showed we had very racialized outcomes in standard measures of achievement, as well as thinking hard about, we looked very carefully at the different pathways our students took. And we had probably over 90 different pathways kids took just to satisfy our 2-year math requirement. So we don't even have a 3-year math requirement. And one of our goals was to increase the number of students taking a 3rd-year math course, and of course a 4th year. And those students who are maybe didn't know initially that they wanted to pursue a 4-year college degree right out of high school. So we developed 2 different pathways, I'm pointing to my computer. We developed 2 different options at the 3rd year. So all of our freshmen take Math 1, all of our freshmen take Math 2, and then you can choose, as Phil was mentioning, at the junior year, you take Math 3S with statistics, which is actually just the Math 3 course aligned with the Common Core integrated Math 3 course. And Math 3 with 3C, we threw out some of the statistics units, and we pulled down, after much research and a conversation with university professors and all of our more advanced course teachers, what did we need to put into a Math 3C so kids would have the best opportunity when they started calculus, if they chose to start calculus. And you can see in that pathway a dotted line. One of the things that Phil and Harold mentioned in their report is the opportunity to move throughout different pathways. So that represents the idea that if a student decides in their junior year, well, I'm really not interested in Math 4 or AP Stats, I could go ahead and take AP Calculus. So we provide a summer bridge program for any student, actually, if that decision is made. We have plenty of kids in our 3C course who take that as well to get a little extra prep for AP Calculus. Next slide. So we're working from this theory of change that we have to fix the system, not the teacher. So much of the professional learning our teachers go through is about them changing their practice alone in a system that is not designed for them to improve instruction. So it's not part of our belief system. So we're about at year 6 of really significant change, but recognize that it's a very long process to see certain measures of achievement that our school board would like. But we have seen lots of wonderful things happening that aren't measured necessarily by a standardized test. So next slide. So here are some of the changes to the system we have made. If you're listening and you're thinking about detracking, so we chose an integrated mathematics course pathway, chose a problem-based textbook. If you're interested in what that is, Core Plus Mathematics. We detracked, which to us seems like just a minor part of this, and we eliminated remedial courses. So we have no below grade level courses. We're only a high school district. We have a variety of grading things happening in our district. We figured that would come around about year 3, and it has. We have prioritized shared planning periods for teachers in course-like classes. I think something very unique to our district, and I'm going to give a quick little shout out to Teachers Development Group again. They started us on this pathway, and then we have modified it and they helped us build capacity. So we have every single teacher in our math teacher in our district participating between 4 and greater number of times a year in a teaching studio, where our focus is on improving teaching practice collaboratively with colleagues working together to set goals and make changes in and out of each other's classrooms. Our teacher partnership is we have coaches at every site, math coaches at every one of our school sites. We have an aligned hiring practice. We hire math teachers at the district level, and those are aligned to our value system. We have been running summer workshops. We have a teacher curriculum that we've developed in our partnerships, university partnerships with a local university and then a university in Georgia. And then we are working really hard to have classrooms that are discourse rich, where kids are thinking hard and interacting very regularly. Next slide. So specifically around detracking, we identified a lever for change. In this case, it was the Common Core and the standards for math practice. We used those to our benefit to move instruction in our district. Had a very clear message from the top of our district, our superintendent and assistant superintendent at the time, and from me. And we did a lot of research with our partners, looked at all the pathways we'd had in our district that I'd said before, and began these conversations with the leadership team and created these pathways based on what we read about tracking, we read about or the damages of tracking. We reached out to university professors about what kids needed. Now that Catalyzing Change has been published and recommending one of their key recommendations for secondary math is all students having access to a set of essential concepts. That has just dovetailed perfectly with our work. It's been our belief all along, and so now we have the power of Catalyzing Change to recommend our detracking essential concepts, detracking of both teachers and students. And I think I have one more. We do have some preliminary data. One more slide. Some preliminary data that shows one of our big things we wanted to see happen in our district as an argument to try to include a third-year requirement for our district, which we're not there yet, but we've really increased significantly the number of students taking grade level courses. So especially at that 11th grade year, which as most of us in California know, that's where we do our testing. So if we don't have kids in there, it's just not kids in their junior year, it's really not possible to even imagine that test scores would change in some way. So I know that Phil and Harold have some questions for me, so I'm going to stop there. And
so what, Abby, what do you do to help students make their choice of pathways?
Included in Harold and Phil, Phil's report, if you'll read that, you will see our decision tree. We have teachers at each site go out and talk to all of our Math 2 students. I've done it myself some years. And we ask them what their future goals are. Hopefully they know what their future goals are, or starting to have some inkling. And basically we're kind of pushing them to decide if they want to take calculus or not in high school. So if they know for a fact that a STEM career is in their future, then that pathway to AP Calculus is what we recommend, our Math 3C course. And we hand out our decision tree and our kids work through it. So they're making the decision, not a counselor. We ask them to make the decision with their families, of course. But we walk through that, and the big question is, do you want to take calculus at the high school level or not? If not, then our Math 3S course is a wonderful course. And then Math 4 or AP Stats for their fourth year course is an option. Now we're just getting started with this, so we imagine someday this really much more robust collection of offerings at the fourth year. There are a variety of courses that we'd like to see offered, and we're in the process of beefing up our computer science offerings. So we want kids to have a whole lot of choices at that fourth year.
Have you seen any change or improvement in the demographics of students in the different pathways?
Yes, we have. Yeah, so we have many more students just in general taking the courses. I'm a little concerned and worried right this minute, personally, that Math 3S pathway is considered the pathway for students of color, and that we may have more white students in our 3C course. I think that's one of the biases of our system that we're working against. We have yet to see any outcome in our test data, our standardized test data with CASP, but we are hopeful that this is just the second year that we'll take that test, or last year was. So we're in this fine-tuning mode, which is an expensive mode to be in. This is hard work, and it costs a lot of money to do the professional learning that that math teachers need to have classrooms that have all students in them. It's a very different way to teach than they were taught.
Thank you. I wanted to note that I'm not sure if we shared examples of branch pathways, but some of the destinations that the branch pathways are intended to prepare students for are areas like law, politics, design, and media. I just pulled those out of the report a moment ago. I encourage you to send in questions. If you can send them on the Q&A and not on the chat, it's a lot easier for us to find your questions. And I actually have a question for Phil and Harold, and then also perhaps Abby. The report recommends that students have 4 years of math, but it says that shouldn't necessarily be a graduation requirement. I'm wondering if you can tell us why not. And also Abby mentioned your district has a 2-year requirement. You might be able to fill us in on that as well, Abby.
4 years of math is good for students. We have data that indicates having recently taken a math course puts you in a good position when you get to college. So taking a course in your senior year. But there are practical issues. Who is going to teach the extra sections of mathematics? What other courses won't the students be able to take because they're enrolled in mathematics? And what is the nature of the fourth-year course? What's content? And so on. So just jumping to a requirement without dealing with those practical issues can lead to a bad version of a good idea. And that's, we're saddled with so many bad versions of good ideas as it is. So I think letting the students drive it is probably the best way to enter the near term.
And just to add to that, I think that two additional aspects are recruiting students into STEM ideas, but putting a requirement without the necessary support for students to be successful is also, I think, not helpful. So how do we think about making requirements but that support students in being successful?
Yeah, we have several folks asking about 9th graders who come in and may not be ready for Algebra 1. Are there good models for supporting students, 9th graders, to succeed in Algebra 1?
Well, I think here is where we have to deal with some postponed dealing with reality. For the last 20 years, the number of students entering 9th grade who are not ready for Algebra 1 exceeds 50%. That tells you something. Something's wrong. And for too long, we've said, well, it's the preparation, well, it's the students, well, it's the professional development. Yeah, those things contribute, but isn't it about time we look at the course itself? Maybe Algebra 1 is a broken course. Maybe it's an impractical course. Maybe the system can't do it. And so part of what we want to do in changing the goal at 11th grade is open up the possibility for reforms in 9th and 10th grade and make Algebra 1 a course that's designed for all students, not designed just for STEM students. And the STEM students will get what they need for STEM in the STEM branch later. And meanwhile, the students heading into the branches, like law, nursing, and so on, that's what Algebra 1 or Math 1 and Math 2 can provide a good foundation for. So I think we have to look at the course and not regard Algebra 1 as some kind of sacred cow.
Abby, did you want to add anything about the graduation?
No, I agree with that very strongly. I think we have sort of this misguided understanding of how mathematics learning works that has determined the way we have privileged Algebra 1 for so many years. And I strongly believe that that many kids are more ready for Algebra 1 or Math 1 than people let us believe. I think all kids can access deep, rigorous mathematics, even if they can't multiply or divide, but we have so many tools available to us that we can develop deep conceptual understanding of mathematical ideas and develop procedural fluency at the same time without using that. I would argue that when we say kids aren't ready for algebra, we're talking about their procedural fluency with some pretty basic arithmetic facts. And I just don't believe that is true.
Well, so also one of the things we mentioned is that we do need to have support.
Yes.
In higher ed, they've created this concept which is spreading like wildfire of co-requisite courses.
Yes.
Alternative to remediation. And where it's been tried in New York and Texas and California, it's been much more successful than remediation. If you look at the data on remediation in higher ed, it just doesn't work. The number of kids who make it through remediation and then go on to succeed is despairingly small. On the other hand, if you enroll the student in the credit-bearing course and at the same time a co-requisite course that supports their success. For example, if they're enrolled in a college statistics course for social science majors, and the co-requisite course helps them succeed in that statistics course. In other words, it's not remedial, it's not covering Algebra 2, it's covering topics that you need to succeed in that statistics course, then the success rate is much higher than remediation. And that's why higher ed is moving in that direction. And we should be moving in that same direction. So there will be students in Algebra 1 that need simultaneous support in addition to the regular Algebra 1 course.
So, well, there are a lot of questions on the support question. We may come back to it, but I'm going to give you a few others now. Question about what you think about offering courses such as personal finance, business math, or math modeling, either in place of Algebra 2 or the course after Algebra 2?
I think there should be different versions of Algebra 2 for students who have different aspirations. And, you know, we want to postpone the forced choice as long as possible, but you can't postpone it forever. And the price you pay for making the freshman and sophomore years more pragmatic for all students is that the STEM students will need the more difficult stuff, and you can't wait too long. So 11th grade is when that starts. Meanwhile, there needs to be a college eligible pathway starting in 11th grade for non-STEM majors interested in things like law, nursing, design, and well, most careers. are not STEM careers, but they have math in them. And the math that they have is the math that of using math. In other words, it's more like applications. So there's a lot of jobs where you may see a formula and have to substitute and evaluate, but you don't have to manipulate it algebraically. And there's a lot of places where there's modeling going on, understanding the quantitative structure of a situation and expressing it algebraically. So yes, modeling, application, everyone needs finance. The STEM students need it too. So I'd like to see that move down into the freshman and sophomore courses.
So,
But let me just remind us that just having the courses is not enough. That we need to think about the system. And so in addition to recruiting students into STEM and creating the supports that they would need to be successful, communication is very important, because how do we communicate to parents? How do we communicate to students and anybody in the system about what those options are, what these new courses offer, and how they are about relevant mathematics for whatever students are interested in? We have to think about it in a systemic way, that these are all aspects of the system that will make the experience of the students more coherent and successful.
great, thank you. Now we have a couple questions for Abby. One is, how does opt-in honors work? If it's detracked, how does opt-in honors fit with detracking, I guess is the question.
So traditionally, an honors course is something that's decided the previous year by some metric. And so when you are choosing your classes the previous year, you or somebody chooses that you can or should be in an honors course. An opt-in honors program works where everybody in every single one of our math courses has the opportunity to opt in. So after the beginning of the year, learns from their teachers what would be required. And they take a deeper, so they fill out a contract that their parents and guardians and counselors sign, as well as the teacher, and say they're going to commit to some deeper work into the mathematics of the course. So we have extension problems all through for each of our units. Each unit test has a different problem that is students who have opted into the honors program are required to do, as well as different projects throughout the year. And we have what's called a demonstration of learning twice a year, once per semester, where families come, kids come, and we have a big event where kids have chosen a topic that they're interested in and taken a really deep dive into it, and then present that to their colleagues and families. So it's trying to provide the enrichment that is usually part of an honors class to anyone who's interested in it, rather than someone telling you you can't do it.
So they're in the same class together?
They're in the same classroom. Mm-hmm.
I want to address, I see a number of questions about students who can't multiply and stuff. And I just want to address that. We're proposing a change in the structure and the system of courses. That's not going to solve all the problems. It's going to transfer some of those problems into a new system and a new context where it will be easier to solve them. So this is not like a magic bullet. Kids who can't reason multiplicatively, just because they're in a different course doesn't mean that problem solved. It means you now have a system where you can work on solving that problem in a way that's more likely to succeed.
Okay, getting back to the questions for Abby. Another question was, someone wondered what you meant by 90. Did you say something about 90 different pathways to fulfill the 2-year math requirement?
Well, I think it was close to 90. This was when we looked back at our historical data. It wasn't that we had these outlined pathways. It was kids took a semester and failed a semester, and then they passed another semester and maybe did some online and maybe did some retaking of a course, so that we just had such inconsistent paths to fulfilling the high school requirement. And that was mostly our students who struggle. So it wasn't formal pathways we had outlined.
This was in parallel to the West Ed report from 2012 that showed very few students were actually pursuing the same pathways. I see. And this was your district version of that.
Yeah.
Right. We also had some questions about the repetition of calculus in college, whether that's by choice, whether that's students not earning college credit because they didn't pass the AP test. And I want to add that there's an additional reason for this, I think, which is that there are colleges, there are universities that say, okay, well, if you succeed in AP calculus, you're eligible to take a calculus class. I mean, there are some, what I would say, regressive policies that require students to repeat courses, which is part of the challenge of, which is why alignment is one of the values of just equations, because that's one of the issues we do need to address. So we can't say for sure that the students are repeating calculus because they actually needed to or they chose to. It may have to do with the misalignment in the requirements across the systems. So yes, let me see. There were a couple other questions that, there was a question about prerequisites versus tracking outcomes. From how are prerequisites different from tracking outcomes, given that prerequisites typically require a particular grade to move on? Are you proposing something different from that? And I think this question's for Harold or Phil. Do you want to take that one, Harold?
So sorry, but the question.
How are prerequisites different from tracking outcomes? Because often with prerequisites, typically it'll say, well, you have to get a certain grade in this course in order to take the next one. So how do you propose to deal with that?
Well, so I think that the main purpose is to build in students the foundation that they need to give them the opportunity to be successful. So the courses, for example, that are in for requisite course, they don't require that students have a prerequisite to enter into them, but rather they are they go in there to build the necessary knowledge that they need in order to be successful as they continue. So it's not it's creating more flexibility in the way that students are evaluated about whether they have the right knowledge in order to continue, and not make the grade be the thing that will keep them or not in remedial courses, for example.
Now, we have a question. Let's suppose that this is very early. A lot of these recommendations, we talked about some school districts in Oregon, Escondido, and others scattered around the country, but this is very early days. But let's say this develops and these branch pathways are developed at the high school level. What implications does this have for middle school math and then even for elementary math? Abby, would you like to, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, our feeder districts who are K through 8, they teach in middle school, teach math 6, math 7th, and math 8, really aligned with the Common Core courses standards there. So yet they feel regular pressure from parents to accelerate in the middle school level. So far they have not, they're not accelerating in our district. I know that there are many other models that have acceleration, and even in the, I think in our, in the California framework, they list some acceleration models at the middle school. I think Math 6, Math 7, and Math 8 are wonderful courses full of really rich mathematics, and I think those courses should live as they do, and middle school students should be exposed to them, and then they feed really nicely into a system that is like ours, or the Oregon system that has whatever options are there. I mean, we haven't, by our detracking and changing our pathways, we still have the same terminal courses at our fourth year. One of our schools offers Calc BC, the AP Calculus BC, and we now have dual enrollment with one of our local colleges. So not accelerating at middle school isn't causing any trouble for us at the high school level. It's just when parents feel that kids need to be in AP Calculus by sophomore year for some reason, which is common, actually.
That there's a lack of articulation now.
Yes.
Middle and high school, and that, so we need to work on better articulation. And the other one is about standards-based instruction that we can build on what students learn in the previous, but we need to create more coherent system.
Amy Getz from Dana Center. Are you gonna do that?
We're out of time now,
Oh.
Phil. So we have a lot of questions that we haven't had a chance to get to, I'm afraid. We will do our best to try to respond to some of them outside of this context. I want to thank you so much for joining us. The Branching Out report is available on the Just Equations website. If you are new to Just Equations, I invite you to explore the report and other resources on the site, as well as to sign up for our mailing list to participate in future webinars and events. The webinar recording and slides will be posted on our website, by next week.